Well, greetings and welcome to Faith Connections. I'm grateful that you've joined us today. We continue our series from the book of Psalms. Today we find ourselves in Psalm 31, and we find David making a plea for deliverance and seeking mercy as he begins the psalm. But he concludes in an expectant praise of God for an answer that has not yet come. Twice, David prays for help, and twice he expresses confident trust in God. You know, for the last 2 years, we've faced some rather difficult days, and we may have found ourselves asking for God's deliverance, mercy, help. And for that reason, I think this psalm can help us. And it's quite appropriate as we enter this Easter season of celebration. Scott Rainey, the director of Sunday School Ministries for the Church of the Nazarene, makes a powerful connection between David's prayer and one terrible day in the life of Jesus that we refer to as Good Friday. Trusting God in the face of death is one of life's greatest challenges, one of life's greatest tests. In this psalm, we hear a profound faith in God for both the living and the dying. The psalmist himself depends upon God's protection, care, goodness, and love to sustain him. And that will work for us too. Hey, it's possible to put faith in God, even during some of life's most difficult moments. This psalm opens with faith in the Lord's ability to protect. It's a prayer for help. Psalm 31, verses 1 through 5 is where we'll start. In you, Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me. Come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead and guide me. Keep me free from the trap that is set before me or set for me. For you are my refuge. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Deliver me, Lord, my faithful God. So the psalmist entrusts his life to God for protection and safety. His petition, his requests are many. To deliver me, to turn your ear to me, come quickly to my rescue, be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. Lead and guide me. Keep me free from the trap that is set for me. Deliver me from my enemies. And all of those appeals, all of those pleas show how deeply, how earnestly the psalmist places his trust in God, how he depends on God. And in that passage, we hear these metaphors about a rock and a refuge and a fortress. Again, ways of showing how the psalmist depends on God for safety and protection. The psalmist's appeal for protection and deliverance, it's based on his understanding of God's character and his reputation. God has a history. And God's character, not only with the psalmist, but with us, is a God who is faithful. And that's really the basis of appeal from David, because he knows God to be faithful. He is depending on God's faithfulness. And he knows that God faithfully fulfills the promises that he makes. And God acts according to his character. As his enemies press in, the psalmist testifies that God is a a rock of refuge, a strong fortress. So it's this image. It's a place where a person is saved from the enemy's attack. The psalmist declares that God is a fortress because of his righteousness. It's that he knows God always does the right thing. It may not always seem that way. It may not look like it at the moment, but we can trust God, and we can trust that God knows what he is doing. We can be confident that God will lead and guide through tough times. God is committed to doing the best thing for his people because God is faithful. I believe that I could hear a testimony out there that in the midst of our difficulty and adversity in these past 2 years, we have witnessed how faithful God has been. In fact, we are in the midst of preparing a budget for 22-23, and as we review how faithful God has been to us in these difficult times, it would cause us to give him praise. So on those bases, on this basis, the psalmist then commits his life, his spirit, into God's hands. The psalmist ends this appeal with this phrase, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." Spirit, ruah, wind, breath, power. And here it most likely just simply means the psalmist's life. I commit my life to you. Those are the words of one who trusts their entire life into God's hand, or into God's hands, who he knows, we know, can save us. Now, it's probably, those words are familiar in this season of the year, because in Luke 23:46, those are the words that Jesus speaks from the cross, aren't they? Into your hands I commit my spirit. And because of the character of God, and because we know God always does the right thing, we too can commit our life into God's hands, even during the difficult times. Well, the psalmist sets himself apart from those who cling to worthless idols, because he knows knows God cares. And he, in verses 6-10, declares his loyalty to God. Listen to these words. And they're rather strong words, if you think about it. I hate those who cling to worthless idols. I hate those who cling to worthless idols. As for me, I will trust the Lord. I will be glad and rejoice in your love, for you saw my affliction and knew the anguish of my soul. You have not given me into the hands of the enemy, but have set my feet in a spacious place. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my afflictions, and my bones grow weak. Well, he opens that passage with rather strong words. I hate is a rather strong denouncement of idolatry and those who worship false gods. Idols are worthless objects that have no power to save. In contrast, the psalmist places his trust in the Lord, who has demonstrated his power to save his people. That just comes up over and over again, that God has a history with us, doesn't it? We see him at work. We've said in a recent sermon that when we can't see what God is doing in the moment, we can remember what he has done in the past. The psalmist's confidence in God's actions leads him to express his gladness and joy in God's love for him. I love what we read there that says, he saw my afflictions and knew the anguish of my soul. Recently on a Wednesday night, as we've been on the move with Moses, we recognized how God has this pattern of seeing the difficulty of his people and having compassion for them and being concerned about them. It's why the Lord calls Moses to deliver the children of Israel out of their bondage. God saw the affliction of the psalmist and knew the anguish of his soul, just like he saw the affliction of the Israelites and delivered them from Egypt in Exodus chapter 3. We can stand upon this great truth today, that our suffering never goes unnoticed by God. Every human life, including ours, matters in heaven. The psalmist in Psalm 116, verse 15 says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful servants. So we are reminded of God's great love for us. The confidence of the psalmist is further fueled by his understanding of God's goodness. The psalmist expresses trust in God, and he does so directly. We were to read again verse 6, and if we read verse 14 in just a moment, there's this emphatic I, which shows the psalmist's strong resolve not to let his circumstances or his enemies negatively impact or influence his relationship with God. You are my God is a declaration of the psalmist's complete devotion and loyalty to God and his utter dependence on God to deliver him. There are no other gods for the psalmist. Well, let's just hear how he says. But I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me. Let your face shine on your servant. Save me in your unfailing love. Let me not be put to shame, Lord, for I have cried out to you. But let the wicked be put to shame and be silent in the realm of the dead. Let their lying lips be silenced. For with pride and contempt they speak arrogantly against the righteous. How abundant are the good things that you have stored up for those who fear you, that you bestow in the sight of all on those who take refuge in you. I love that. How abundant are the good things that you have stored up for those who fear you, that you bestow in the sight of all on those who take refuge in you. In the shelter of your presence, you hide them. From all human intrigues, you keep them safe in your dwelling from accusing tongues. Well, the Hebrew word trust really resonates with this absolute reliance upon another. It almost suggests this careless, reckless confidence. That's the psalmist. So the psalmist admits that his times, his future destiny, are in the hands of God. He knows God's plans are far better than his own. And certainly those of his enemies. Verse 16. Wow, what a powerful phrase. Let your face shine. A prayer that recalls the priestly blessing of Numbers 6:25. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. So as God's servant, the psalmist lived under the authority and the protection of God, his master. His life depended on God's favor, the bestowal of God's grace on him. And the petition, save me, makes clear that the favor he saw from God was his deliverance. And he based that on God's unfailing love. The psalmist made no claim to his own merit, his own righteousness, but he trusted God's covenant loyalty and his faithfulness. This section of the psalm gives a reason for being confident in the goodness of God. The psalmist, he reflects on the good things the Lord has put in his life. And he imagines them being kept in a storeroom somewhere and distributed for all to see. And in verse 20, the good things of God include a shelter in their presence far away from the enemy, from the enemy's plots and accusing tongues. The list could be longer, and we could probably add some things to it. For God's goodness comes to us in many ways. So we come to the end of this lesson today about in the midst of adversity and difficulty that we can trust God. It's these final verses of the psalm that include words of praise, testimony, and admonition. The psalmist praises God for the wonders of his love. He praises him for an answer that he does not yet have. Here, praise be to the Lord, for he shows me the wonders of his love. When I was in a city under siege, in my alarm, I said, I am cut off from your sight. Yet you heard my cry for mercy when I called to you for help. Love the Lord, all his faithful people, exclamation. The Lord preserves those who are true to him, but the proud he pays back in full. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord. Well, there's just another reason to place our confidence in God. The word for love here is that word of unfailing love. It is a loyal love that never gives up on a person. In verses 21 and 22, the psalmist testifies to the way the Lord showed his love when he was in a city under siege. The Lord heard his cry for help, and he responded. The psalmist's final admonition urges us to do something, to love the Lord, to be strong, and to take heart. So in other words, we are challenged to continue believing in the protection, care, goodness, and love of God, as Jesus did in the garden. In Luke 22:42, Jesus fully places his trust in his Father and simply says, yet not my will, but yours be done. So we close today. Let's think about our confidence in the Lord. The psalmist's pleas for help in times of need are actually testimonies to his faith. He turns to the one who he knows can actually make a difference, and not to someone or to something else. We can trust God, not just in the good times, but in the difficult times. Today, I would ask you, what is it that you need to trust the Lord with? Why not do that right now?